In a recent New York Times article, Dr. Lerner writes, when attending a medical talk about the connection of unhealthy diets to obesity, heart disease, and cancer, I was caught by surprise. You see, the speaker commented that when I want to discuss this issue with patients, I always ask permission. Permission? When do doctors have to ask permission? A colleague of mine would ask his medical students, he would say, what are the limits? What questions are we not allowed to ask? And you know what they said? The only question you can't ask is, who did you vote for in the last election? But what he meant is that mental illness, substance use, sexual behavior, and diet were all fair game for questions. So after the session, I sent an email to the speaker to ask if she really meant, if I heard her correctly, to ask permission. She said yes, indeed. She went on to tell me that she might broach the subject as follows. I'd like to share with you how your food choices can help lower cholesterol, your blood pressure, and blood sugar so that you may be able to avoid taking more medicine and be healthier. Would you like to hear more about this? Being Jewish does not just allow us to ask questions. It demands that we ask questions. But it means we need to ask questions in the right way to be as effective as possible. So when is the best time to ask a question? After you've built a relationship of trust. We see that in this week's Torah portion with Moses. In Parshat Ekev, Moses retells how God has forgiven the Israelites and instructed Moses to write the second set of the Ten Commandments. Moses recaps their history in order to remind us that now we have recovered our trusting relationship. We have repaired whatever ups and downs we have gone through in these past few decades while traveling through the desert. Moses intuits that this is the right time to ask the question. What does God ask of you? Ve'ata Yisrael, ma Adonai Elohecha shoel me'imach. At this moment, Israel, what does God ask? And of course, Moses answers his own question with a three-part answer. He says, first, be awestruck with God's universe. Second, emulate God by acting with compassion towards others. And third, love God with all your heart and all your soul. The key phrase in this verse is actually that first word, ve'ata, now, at this moment. It's in this tiny phrase we learn the wisdom of how to ask a question. Moshe Rabbeinu is not just our leader, he was a master teacher. We can learn from Moses how to ask a question. Religion is an answer to humanity's ultimate questions. But before we can internalize the Torah's wisdom and rabbinic understanding, we need to recover these questions. And in order to recover those questions, we need to appreciate how to ask the questions. A great question at the right time can be life-changing. It can open up a needed conversation, change one's perspective on life, and carry someone further on their own spiritual journey. Like a doctor, we can't be timid when asking fierce questions that will ultimately help somebody else who is suffering. Yet, we learn from Moses that first we must build trust, and only then, when the right moment presents itself, we can ask that question to maximize its effect. For example, asking permission is one effective technique. The point is that you don't just want to say over the information, you want behavioral change. There are many now moments where we can be asking questions that can lead to real changes. Let's not shy away from the power of these moments. It could be when saying goodnight to a loved one who is anxious about waking up the next morning. It could be a colleague who seems frustrated. It could be a dear friend who is wasting time in an unhealthy relationship. Let's teach our children to ask questions. Let's model for our friends and relatives what a soulful question looks like, what a soulful question feels like. Let's tackle the myth that questions are combative or disrespectful. Let's celebrate questions as loving curiosity, as inquisitive empathy. Let's invite others to ask questions, and let's even make a daily habit of asking ourselves questions. The chaplain at Lebanon shared a story that he knew this couple for quite a while, and after many decades of being together, they were not formally married, and the husband only had a short amount of time left. And after getting to know him, he said, "Dave, can I ask you a question?" He said, "Sure." He said, "How come you never married Rachel? I see such love between y'all." He thought about it. He said, "Well, we were just too afraid it would lead to hurt, and we didn't want to hurt one another." Well, a few days later, they got married. It reminds me of a friend of mine. We were out getting coffee together, a few of us, and he walks into the coffee shop, and he was ecstatic, and he hadn't really found the right person for such a long time. And we said, "What's going on?" He said, "You'll never believe it. I met the most amazing spouse. The girl, I'm in love with her. She's great. She's funny. She's smart. She's everything. But what? Well, I kind of wanted to date a girl who was 6'2", tall like a model." So my buddy Josh turns to him, pulls out his cell phone, and he says, "This, for these 4.5 inches, you're really gonna give up on this?" Well, 6 months later, they continued to date, and they eventually married. Never underestimate the power of a soulful question. This Shabbat, Moses teaches us the power of a well-timed, thoughtful question. So let's use this Shabbat, these next 24 hours, to ask questions in the most effective way by building a relationship of empathy, of deep listening, and trust. And we will allow for moments that are best suited to ask these soulful questions. Shabbat Shalom.